Samson. Thank you for getting together with me and to discuss basically the meet you had the other night with a few other groups from around the New England area who were pretty much just concerned about where the country was going with regard to both COVID and the elections. I just wanted to really just talk to you, as like a person, just to kind of get a vibe for where you're coming from, your story, uh, how you became decided to get involved,
Oh,
um,
sure.
and so pretty much just can start off there.
Well, I don't know exactly where to start, but I appreciate you wanting to chat about this type of stuff because we're always looking for an opportunity to, kind of discuss why we do what we do because it, a lot of people, they've only heard about us because of the Straight Pride Parade, and a lot of people think it's really distasteful, to put it mildly. Right now, I go to law school, and I'm going through a lot of stuff at law school right now, including some students anonymously put together it was like an 82 or an 84 page complaint. They sent it to the ABA, and the very, very first topic in this complaint was me, and about how I'm affiliated with supposed what they call known white supremacist groups. And the school, they went on and on and on about me. And then they attacked the school. They said, well, the school was made known about this, and they failed to do anything. And they cited all these other incidents that they believe, people were harmed because of microaggressions or whatever from professors. And they sent this to the American Bar Association, and they were trying to have me. They wanted to make it so they couldn't. I couldn't take the bar, and they wanted to like discipline the school until they complied with what these anonymous demands were. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the stuff that we deal with regularly. Mark
Yes.
Sahadi's been kicked off of Facebook. We've been banned from all sorts of different platforms, and um, I don't know, and people ask us like, is it worth it? Like, do you really enjoy being the center of all this negative attention? And I don't know. I think people see through what the media says and what the naysayers say. Um, but in the meantime, like it seems like if you're on the right or if you're a conservative or a Republican or a libertarian, you're. It seems like you're on the losing side right now because the media, the big corporations, big tech, everybody's against you. And we're trying to give them a voice. We're trying to be like, hey, normal traditional American values are not a bad thing. And it seems like they're really under attack now, and that's kind of like that's what I think drives a lot of us. Straight pride, do you want me to continue, or do you want to interrupt
Oh
and ask
well,
me a
yeah.
question?
No, I just want maybe just to kind of. I think that's a good thing for people to understand about like the level of kind of actual oppression that's being done, like institutionalized. And I'm not going to say that there isn't other valid criticisms of the various systems that our country has on the left, but I think to for if there is going to have if there is going to be any kind of coming together of the country, it would be, you would hope, at the higher learning institutions, but it seems to be that um,
It's the opposite.
it's the opposite. They're kind of encouraging, they're indoctrinating people with this exact kind of behavior and pretty much doctrine. But I just wanted to understand, because this is the you started the straight pride, and you got involved with that, and I understand, and from my perspective, the necessity to, in a way, be satirical, to
Yes.
highlight some of the kind of absurdity, and I do worry that, well, and again, you don't want to play into the whole kind of like site kind of mental gymnastics these people are doing by kind of kowtowing to their psychological kind of abuse. Really, it's like a psychological form of abuse that they're doing. Um, but I do worry that oftentimes, like if you do come with like that kind of like if you don't really if you do or if you're too satirical and you're not really kind of like taking them seriously or addressing them, it kind of just ends up being like a shouting match and people aren't really kind of it's like you're shouting across a barricade, which is so often actually literally what you're doing because but which is unfortunate. You can't have these kinds of things. It's in part because of how they've been indoctrinated to treat you as such, like with like terms like white supremacist or
Yep.
neo-Nazi or whatever. They kind of dehumanize you, and then they can legitimize this behavior that allows for that gap to widen, and then people cannot engage in discourse, and then you don't have any help from the media. You don't have any help from the higher education. So I can definitely see where you're coming from in that regard. But I just wanted to more or less know because you started before the Super Happy Fun America doing other stuff with resist Marxism and everything. What was it that how did you get involved? I understand you're a veteran, and
Yes.
so you've obviously been called to service in some regard, and so I just wanted to more or less get more of like a where you are, where you came from in that regard, and then how you evolved slowly into Super Happy Fun America
Well,
with more.
that's a very deep question. Um, like really. So I joined the army in 2005, and I served from 2005 to 2008. And this was, not just a few years after 9/11, right? And the way that I look at it was, at the time, serving was a noble thing, and everybody had questions as to the legitimacy of the Iraq War, even at the time. But it became less of a like we're going to fight to, you know, engage in this morally virtuous war. It was more about like, you're hearing these stories about roadside bombs every day and soldiers getting killed, and it's like, uh, I knew that if I didn't sign up and serve, then I would regret it someday. And I knew also that all the skills that I learned while I was in the military, they can't take that away from you once you learn them. So like you could go and serve and do a short time, and you get out with all these incredible skills that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And after I got out in 2008 when Obama was elected, and um, I was that's when I started questioning things a lot harder than I was before. Right, I started looking into like all the different countries that we were messing around with. I was questioning the events surrounding 9/11, which I think are, it's a sham. Like the official story is, you have to be. I don't want to make fun of anybody, but I don't buy the official story, right? And I think a lot of people don't buy the official story. And so the more I dug, the more I started to realize that there's a lot of people who just go along with it, and they either believe it or they choose not to do anything about it because the task seems too daunting to be able to do anything as an individual, right? And as time goes on, like you said, we hear about the colleges and the institutions and all these different places that just seem to be either complying with and going along with this, what I perceive to be a communist Marxist like agenda, or actively promoting it, like in the case of institutions and some of these big tech and big corps, right? And that's when I started to be like, we need to be more proactive. And around 2014, 20 to 20 like 2016 is when I started to really see a lot of the play between Antifa and like the right. That's when Kyle Chapman, Base Stick Man, was kind of like a icon.
Mhm.
And the way the media would report it, it would be like, yeah, these literal neo Nazis and white supremacists are coming out to protest taking down these Confederate statues, and these like morally virtuous darlings called Antifa. They're anti-fascists, literally in their name. They're just coming out and defending the communities from these actual like modern day fascists. And then they'd show like property being destroyed and like windows being broken and looting and all this other stuff, and it would always be Antifa, of course, and somehow they got cover while the right would be demonized. And I always knew that the media was lying to us, and that's when I was like, if there's ever one of these free speech events in my area, I want to attend it and I want to see for myself if these people are actual literal Nazis and white supremacists, or if like the media is lying about something. And what is it that they're lying about? Why would they lie about these people? And that's kind of how I got involved in the very first free speech event in August of 2017, which was really incredible. You know, it was a week after Charlottesville, which I think most of the world agrees that there were literal white supremacists and neo Nazis there. I'm not saying the entire group was, but it was clear that there was a significant presence, at least from what I can tell. And then that girl got killed in the streets, run over by a car. I don't wish that on anybody, of course, right? It doesn't matter your ideology.
Hmm.
And that caused everybody to look at the Boston Common for the free speech rally that was happening a week later. And that's really when I got my first taste of how bad the state of free speech was in the United States, because they didn't let the media in to report anything. They had this narrative that, even though what I saw with my own eyes and ears, it was completely the opposite. The narrative still continued even after that free speech rally, when it was clear that the people who attended and spoke and were not white supremacists, they were not neo Nazis, and the police even they prevented people like me from being able to speak, and people like you from the media to be able to report clear civil rights violations. And that's what made I knew after that point that there was room for a movement in the Boston area, and there were a lot of people who were thirsty to be part of that, like Marcia Haiti, another founder of Super Happy Fun America, and that's when him and I met, and we've been organizing events ever since in this area and around the area.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's definitely a need, and I think that there's the hunger is definitely growing as people kind of like as it becomes more apparent to people the kind of deception that is going on both in the media. I think this election brought a lot of that out, just with the
Absolutely.
coverage. And I'm not saying necessarily to be that they need to be pro the president, but they were pretty clearly slanted against the the president, in my opinion. Um,
I think
and
hating the media is bipartisan at this point.
yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, which is an interesting, insight into the state of the Republican Party and well, the left, which was, the topic of the media was for a long time. They were kind of there was during the Obama presidency, kind of the Democrat Party kind of went more and more kind of into this kind of radical agenda,
Very much.
and I think the media was trying to dial that back. And now it's more or less they've essentially it's become the party's agenda, and now the you know the Republican Party is pretty much now just deciding to rather go with the Democrats than because what I saw at the meeting the other day was pretty much a bunch of people who were of more independent minded, not necessarily left or right. Maybe they were more centrist of either side, I would say, and it was more or less people coming together to kind of in revolt against this kind of um, tyranny that we've seen both with um, the election and the COVID stuff,
Right.
pretty much destroying the economy. And I think we've yet to see the result of that. But you mentioned that it was a kind of like a communist Marxist agenda that you saw
Mm-hmm.
kind of developing, and then also,
The students don't even realize it.
yeah,
They don't
especially in
understand it.
schools. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The professors do. One of my majors was philosophy, and when you study philosophy, you get a lot of those Marxist professors teaching those courses, right? And yeah, so I read a lot of the literature as a result, and they are ideologically they are sometimes openly communist. Like I had a political science professor who said he was further left than Marx, openly, and him and I had a real good relationship because we were both kind of intellectuals, so we could go toe to toe as far as discussions are concerned, and we both like benefit from these discussions. But when you're preaching this stuff to 18, 19, 20-year-old young people, and you're not identifying it for what it is, all they're doing is they're internalizing all these great like social justice terms, and they regurgitate it without knowing that what is ultimately at its core, which is this communist Marxist agenda. So they'll
Right.
deny it until they're blue in the face that what they're advocating for is like total authoritarian controls over everything. But the reality is when you follow their logic to its end, that's what we get is this communist, and they believe in a classless, stateless society where there's nobody there's no governments ultimately controlling it. A true communist society would be like anarchy in a way, but
Right.
they don't understand that. Like we've seen this in Iraq, for example, when we took out Saddam and fired his army and his police forces, the power that used to be there that he wielded became a vacuum, and other groups and other gangs filled that vacuum. And if you look throughout human history, there's always somebody trying to exert power and control and influence over an organized people, right? And so empirically, just looking throughout history, no, communism won't work. We can't do that. Somebody will take advantage of it, and we've seen that in every single manifestation of communism, right? But I wanted to bring this up because you mentioned this earlier, like the risk of just going out into the streets and yelling at each other across a barricade. We've tried doing debates. We've extended, like, I've talked to many of the people across the barricade, so to speak. And I said,
Mhm.
hey, look, this is a bad place for us to have an intellectual discussion, right? I believe that if we were to actually talk about things, then we'd find things in common and we can, like, actually have a good clash on ideas, right? I've been told numerous times after they'll sit there and they'll listen to me and they'll shake their head and they'll seem like they're going along with it. And then they'll be like, sorry, we don't give platforms to fascists. And they turn around and walk away. Like, we can't even have these real discussions with people, unfortunately. Well, where we have lined up debates, did you hear about the Berkeley debate? We
Yeah, I was there actually for that.
Oh, you were. So you know what
Yeah.
happened. Like, we set up this
Yeah.
debate. The people who were supposed to participate in this debate, some of them didn't show up. And then ultimately, when the left figured out Antifa, whoever, whatever you want to call them, when they figured out where we were, they harassed the bar until they kicked us out. Like,
Yeah.
how can we even have a real honest discussion when we can't even meet in semi-public places to have the discussions? It's
I
ridiculous.
think the same thing happened to wasn't it the Green Dragon or something that
Oh
they,
yeah,
they
yeah, that was an after party.
there was an after party and you guys just went to have a drink somewhere after one of the events you guys went to, and then they went and harassed the bar because they allowed you to enter into their bar or
Yeah, the
whatever.
bar. They tried to ruin the bar. Like, they
Yeah.
didn't even know like what was going on.
Yeah, it's
They went.
crazy. It's almost
They
it's
pulled the security footage to be like, what happened with this table? And it was like, oh, they just sat. They had a couple drinks. They ate dinner and left. There was no, Hail Hitlers. There was no Nazi salutes. There was none of that stuff. Like what they made it seem to be.
yeah, but again, like it's like this targeting of business, and I know this was mentioned at the meeting about, you mentioned earlier the about the banking, you can't get on PayPal, you're off Facebook, and they do all these different things to really attack your ability to not only compete but just live almost because of your political views. And it's not just them doing that, it's like the Silicon Valley, it's these, the executives at all these
It almost seems like a conspiracy.
it
Seems
almost
like
seems like a conspiracy, and it's almost, yeah.
right.
Well,
It seems like there's some collective agreements going on to do this behind the scenes.
I definitely think that there's definitely, it's a concerted effort either ideologically, and it's kind of like a zeitgeist type of thing, um and I also do think it's definitely there's a deliberate networking of people definitely organizing a lot of stuff as we've seen. um but I just wanted to get your opinion on, because you mentioned like just doing stuff as an individual, like against all these, um, these powerful corporations and the schools and all these things. Like they're attacking your ability to be a professional as a lawyer, and it's just one example of all these things that they're doing to it, because it's really happening to multiple people, and not just multiple, but lots of conservative type people all across the country. And you, so coming together as like a community, as you kind of did the other day, seemed like a step in the right direction to kind of mount a defense to this organization of the other side, I guess. But I would also just, seems to me like, do you ever have, or do you ever worry, and have you ever actually run into this situation where like people do, like, might infiltrate your group deliberately, or just in the name, and then like do stuff to kind of um
We
lend themselves.
we've had a couple instances where I'll tell you a little bit about it if you want to hear it. There was one instance, and I don't know how this happened, and like there's this media website, I forget exactly which one it is, very left, right? They Somebody provided them screenshots of some sort of chat where resist Marxisms were participants. It wasn't an official resist Marxism chat, but it was some side chat that they had created amongst the group or some members of the group. They said some nasty stuff, right? And somehow these screenshots got leaked to the press, and now it got associated with resist Marxism's name, unfortunately, even though it had nothing to do with them. So yeah, I would say that somebody would have had to have infiltrated in order to be able to do that. And then there was another instance where somebody offered to get T-shirts. They were going to have these custom-made T-shirts, and they were going to send. They marketed themselves to us as if they were a fan of what we were doing, and hooked up with this distributor who could do the T-shirts. Well, lo and behold, they were taking advantage of us. It was like a phishing scam to get identities of people who supported us, and that really that hurt us, right? That was really bad when that happened. So yeah, we're very mindful of it, of people infiltrating and trying to like get information out now. But even then, it's still hit or miss. It's difficult to really weed out any potential opposition.
Yeah. Well,
Because
I was.
we've had people who just throw on red hats and they come like at the events, at the actual day of our events. They'll put on red hats and they'll come and mingle amongst us, and then they'll try to grab a bunch of our equipment and make a run for it. Like we've had stuff like that happen too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, don't get me wrong. I would say that's a pretty, it's a tough thing to overcome when people are attacking your equipment and stifling your events and stuff. But it seems like also it's even more so challenging when your ability to actually organize is consistently under attack. And
Right.
uh, it seems also that like there were a lot of people that were pretty hot under the collar about what's going on in the world, and rightfully
Very
so.
much.
Like from what I saw, and like I worry in my own experience, and because I've done a lot of research, I got into journal. I'll tell you a quick bit about myself.
Sure.
I got in journalism in college because I was completely. I was started off as an engineering student. Didn't doing wasn't fulfilling for me. I saw in the long run, so I saw things that were happening at that time in the media, and I decided to get into journalism, thinking that I was going to make a difference. And then I was pretty naive about the state of where journalism industry was. I thought, oh, maybe if I just be like, this kind of Clark Kent type person that will go in and like, or Spider Man, and like get the story. But I was pretty much full fledged, like aware or made aware of the kind of like indoctrination at school, especially the journalism professors. I mean, don't get me wrong; they were really nice and they allowed me to do my thing. But I was pretty. I was over. I dealt with a lot of stuff myself, and so I saw a lot of that. And
Yep.
I just wanted to say that with that, keeping that in mind, I've seen like in my research as a independent journalist, we'll say, because it's a passion of mine, and I've always wanted to help make a difference in the world, and I always was under the impression that the truth was something that will essentially make a more conducive experience to the world, in theory, right? But
Right.
so I was pretty much just when you see these people that they get into they get into your group and they infiltrate and then they do these provocations. It's kind of like that you see that what the CIA does to um,
Yes.
groups overseas and whatnot, and like how
Right.
they can kind of make conflicts. And it seems like the USA is actually pretty much under like that kind of agenda. That kind of plan is happening and starting to unfold. And I worry that the with all these people who are rightfully hot under the collar, that things are going to escalate to a point where, to a level of um, because they're attacking their businesses and all this stuff, and the people are going to it's going to compromise even further the integrity of your ability to organize and mount a kind of maintain a community that you can thrive, that will be able to meet the challenges of this kind of like dystopian future that seems to be unfolding. But do you ever consider that in that meeting? Did you ever get that vibe or?
Well, you talked about a few different things. So the first one is journalism, right? So I've done a bunch of interviews with different news agencies and things like that, just based off the activism we've been doing. And sometimes we'll get done and they'll shut the camera off, and I'll talk to the reporter off the record, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I don't know how much of this I can actually use because my editor, they're only going to be able to say a couple things, right?" And
Right,
sometimes I feel like I've talked to some reporters who are sympathetic to our cause. They actually kind of are more right than the agenda is. I don't know where they might still be identified as Democrats or whatever, but they don't necessarily agree with the agenda, but they're getting a paycheck, they're paying their bills, and they have a nice job with NBC or ABC or whoever it is that they're reporting for, right? And so
right,
they'll tell me, hey, it was a good interview, and I appreciate you talking with me, but we don't know how much of this we're going to use. And then I'll talk to sometimes the cameramen. They'll be hanging around either before or after the reporter comes and goes, and I'll talk to them, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I've done this stuff for 20 years, and I've seen a significant shift in the way that we do our reporting, the way that everything is going on." And they're like, "Yeah, I'm just going to do my few more years. I'm going to retire, and I'll be good." But they see it. They see what's going on. They see that there's an agenda, and that the media, their bosses, their coworkers, they're towing this agenda, right?
right,
To your question about where do we think we're going, it seems like we've degraded. It's been a gradual, you know, it's gradually declined over the past few years. But now with these elections, and everybody, I don't think that anybody is looking at the elections right now, at least from the perspective of on the right. They don't
mhm,
view the elections as legitimate, right? And
right,
and if you don't view the elections as legitimate, if you don't see the system as legitimate, then I think you're willing to start doing. You're starting to think about non-political solutions, and those non-political solutions are usually not pretty. They tend to. That's when I think violence starts to occur, and that's one of my concerns too. Is like as an event organizer, where I'm asking people to go out in the streets and do something that's controversial, where people are going to show up and literally hate them and wish to do them harm. Is somebody going to bring a firearm to one of these events? Or is somebody going to start like shooting at us or shooting at the police and trying to instigate a larger fight or something? Is one of our events going to be the spark that creates a big issue? It's a concern.
yeah, yeah. It seems like I mean, we saw that with the Vegas stuff, and I think there's been a few other incidents where people have been, well, I mean, that wasn't stopped, but there's been other incidents that were stopped essentially, but people were looking to kind of have this kind of like escalation because in my opinion, from what I've seen, it's not just, the white supremacists or, BLM or whatever. It's kind of like there's like a subliminal thing that happens in our brains like I feel like that kind of like makes us go into these modes where we have to resort to those kinds of like we feel as though that's our only option. And I feel
Yep.
like when you can, when we don't have that community, um, that organization that is necessary, because and then other people come and start saying like you were labeled a white supremacist because whatever reason, but it doesn't matter. That's just because your agenda is not in keeping with what their agenda is. They're gonna just come completely like deplatform you and do all these things and to slander you and do anything. But it's
But they
just
can't. They, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no. I was just gonna say that I just worry that also like that plays into that kind of when you kind of play into their game in that sense. And I just worry that where we're going is, yes, people are rightfully concerned about the elections, and it's almost just like this is just a provocation in itself. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Sure.
that's pretty much what I was just trying to illustrate is like these these completely phony elections, all these other things that are that are so obvious to a lot of people who have seen pretty much anything outside of what CNN is putting out or that's paying attention, and that's not doesn't have their blinders on for Joe Biden or whatever. It's pretty obvious that there was some dirty foul play, and it seems like to me like this obvious stuff that's going on is just more of like a provocation, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I'll get to that point in a second. Can I just make
Yeah,
another discussion point real quick? Um, I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second.
take your time.
It was a good point. I swear. Um, we're by giving people an outlet to organize and try to because I think everybody's looking for something to do. They're like, I don't like what's going on, and I want to do. They want to do something, right? And yeah, so people like me and people like Mark and people like John and all the other, you know, organizers of the events, we've been labeled as all these terrible things: white supremacists, fascists, neo Nazis. But we're also among, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but we're among the first in this area to really be focused on doing this activism long term, right? So we've been kind of like leaders in this movement, and by leaders, I don't mean that as a good thing. It just means that like we've become lightning rods for these types of attacks over and over and over again. Well, I've always done this with the mindset that people are going to get sick of it at some point and stand up and be willing to stand with people like me and people like Mark and people like John, all the other lightning rods who have been attacked. And these tactics that they use, where they call us these terrible names and they go after our workplaces and they go after our schools, and they try to get us fired or doxxed or kicked out or whatever, that will only work for so long. If people start standing up and saying, I'm not going to take this anymore, and damn the consequences. I don't care what I get labeled as. I don't care what happens. If we do this in numbers, then their tactics will become ineffective. The people who are opposing us and launching these attacks, they won't be credible anymore because the volume of them will just go up so much that everybody's going to be like, there's no way that there's this many neo Nazis and fascists and white supremacists in our society. They're crying wolf on the other side, and it'll degrade. It'll take away all their power to be able to do this to us. And I think that that's
Right.
what we're starting to see. Like the fact that we had like 100 people at our meeting the other day is very. I think I made this comment in front of everyone. That tells me that some of our work is starting to pay off. And I think that if we can keep the momentum going, it may turn the tide, and it may these people who might be thinking about how there is no political solution, and they're starting to consider more drastic measures. if we give them this outlet of activism and be like, we're going to give you a voice and we're going to find ways to combat against this politically, and using the media and manipulating them into the way the Super Happy Fun America does, we may be able to alleviate it. We may act as a pressure relief valve for those people who are considering those acts of violence. I
Right.
think that one of the things that, because I think that unfortunately violence may be an inevitable course of action. It may just degrade to that point anyway. But I think that who fires the first shot, so to speak, is going to dictate how this plays out. And I don't, if somebody is going to fire the first shot, I don't want it to be somebody on my side, somebody that I'm trying to organize politically, because then that's going to frame the entire fight, right? Well, we started it. Does that make sense? I don't want that. If
Yeah. Oh,
somebody's gonna
absolutely.
initiate conflict, I want it to be the other side, and I think that they will. I think that we saw over the summer their willingness to do so. To your point about where this is going, I mean, you've heard of a color revolution. I think you alluded to this with the CIA.
Hmm.
Are you familiar? You're familiar with that? Like
Yeah,
when
yeah,
this
but you can
when
go
this
ahead and make it for the sake of the
sure.
clarity. You can expound.
Um, Well, I think that this started with like when we were fighting the Cold War against the Soviet Union, when the CIA would want to try to get these Eastern European countries more to allegiance to the West than to the Soviet Union, we would have to install new governments, new puppet dictators and stuff. So the story goes, the CIA has this formula for overthrowing governments and installing their own puppet governments, and usually that starts with like fomenting some sort of unrest within the country. And then the next step is delegitimizing the elections, right? And so it's not about like anybody who's actively running during those elections. It's just about making people lose faith in the system itself. So once people lose faith in the system itself, that's when they can come in with their solution to the problem, right? And that usually involves instilling a new agenda, having a whole different type of government that's allegiant to the West, and having a semblance of legitimacy. Like you make it seem like that was all legitimate. So they it's problem reaction solution, and it seems like that very same blueprint is what's going on here in the United States. The blatant theft of the elections, right? It's like they didn't even try to conceal it. From my
Hmm.
perspective, you talk to people
Yeah.
on the left, and they don't see it. There's blinders on them, right? But
Right.
if you're trying to actually be intellectually honest and find the evidence and be like, was there significant enough voter fraud to affect the outcome of the elections? I think there's a surplus of it, right? And it's they're brazen, and so it's almost like the purpose was to get caught and to just delegitimize the system altogether.
Right.
And I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think no matter which candidate comes out on top, whether it's Biden or Trump, there's going to be a huge segment of the population who just doesn't view the system as legitimate, and they're going to act out.
Hmm.
I think
Well,
it's by design.
yeah, I do think we're definitely headed to a point, and I think for all that the BLM is, for what they are, kind of like a radical kind of Black Panther-ish, modern day Black Panthers essentially that are pretty much communist and are for all these, destroying the family and all these other things. Um, and then you have the white supremacists. They're all like you mentioned. There's people that are just kind of like looking for the kind of this breakup of the United States into these various kind of like that's what they want. So they're kind of like they're looking to provoke it in a sense. I mean, and I know Louis Farrakhan is who was actually a close associate of Obama in some regard, not necessarily too close, but associated with. Um, he's called for a separatist kind of like ethno state as well. And then you have all these, the white people that are extremists that are want to have their own kind of identity, kind of nation state to maintain their own whatever. It's kind of like defeating the purpose of America, like what we've evolved from, which was, we had the Civil War, then we had we like Abraham Lincoln said, we're either one country or not a country. So
Right.
like you were saying, it seems like this is kind of like a setup to be. It seems like it's almost like, and to a certain extent, I think there's a lot of willingness of the population to kind of go along with this sense that, oh, we're all just this, because we are, America is a kind of like a melting pot, and we do have that kind of identity of people kind of coalescing into their own groups for their own support network, and then from there it kind of devolves into a kind of bloodbath, so to speak. but
Right.
uh but it does seem like there is like an agenda to kind of make a kind of color revolution to kind of like divvy up what we have now seen, or what we've known as our country. but and I do worry that it might get to that point. And I also, but speaking like you were saying, the agenda. Are you familiar with like Agenda 21 and like biodiversity, smart cities, and all these other like things that the kind of is like the cutting edge of the social engineers and all that stuff that they
Yeah,
discuss?
I actually I am, and I do believe that this is a global thing that we're dealing with here in the United States. It's not. This is not just domestic um, organic movements. I think that this really is orchestrated from outside the United. I mean, you have elements in the United States, but I believe in the idea of a deep state, right? And that deep state is a conglomerate of corporate and social and tech and media and banking. All these different things. It's like there is a hidden layer of control that is outside of our elected officials, right? And they're ultimately the ones who try to set the agenda. And I think that some of those agenda items you could be they come through these various channels like the UN, Agenda 21, right? These are the long term goals, I think, of these central planners that we could call them. And these people don't, they're utilitarian in nature, right? They can justify 100,000 deaths in their minds in order
Mm,
to fix some other strategic goal that they have. They can do these cost benefit analyses without really thinking about what the human costs are of their decisions, right? And they think they're doing virtuous things in the process. And the reality, I think, is it's terrible. It's satanic. It's bad. It's evil.
yeah.
We're not supposed to socially engineer. We're not supposed to be engineers of other people's lives on especially these huge scales, right?
Mm,
And until like it's either they're going to win, and I just can't fathom it. Like I can't imagine a world where these people are really in control. And the fact that this fight is coming to the United States now, I think it means that these people think that they have the power, they have the ability to take that control, right? I
right.
do think it's going to be bad. I don't think that this is going to be an easy a cakewalk. And I don't mean
Yeah.
to be doom and gloom. I'm just trying to be realistic about the situation we're in. This is a global thing,
Oh
and
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
I think they're existentially threatened by the prospect of Trump, because when he ran, like both the established parties came out against him. The media, everybody hated him, and yet the people loved him. They go to the rallies. They see that he's an outsider, and I think that he has a massive ego on him, right? But
Mm,
that's not necessarily a bad thing. He wants to go down as one of the best presidents that this country has ever had. You don't do that by going along with whatever this evil fucking agenda. Oh, excuse me. You don't go along. You don't get that by going along with whatever this evil agenda is. You get that
right.
by going after the real bad actors in the world. And I think that he is virtuous, and he really means what he says when he says he wants to go after these people. And if you're threatening the very mechanisms that the deep state has, if you're going after them, then they will stop at nothing to protect their own behinds. And I think that they will bring this country to the brink of war and beyond in order to do so.
Yeah, I don't think that's too far fetched in my own analysis either. I think that there's if you use a tool, if your tool of control, either of pocket politicians or whatever, is like kind of egocentric. If your mode of control is like manipulating people's um, greed or people, if you get them blackmailed or whatever, and do they don't want to continue down or to expose themselves to a certain dis, distasteful kind of lifestyle that might be the prospect of being caught doing something that they shouldn't have done or something, then that's only going to further uh, it's only going to feed their desire to like avoid having to having a come to Jesus moment, let's say.
Well, it's like you can only get elected if you have these skeletons in the closet to be used against you. You for
Yeah,
some reason they're virtuous people with no background, nothing, no pedophile. Like we why do we have real pedophiles like in all these mechanisms of our controls of power, right? Why
hmm,
is it like it seems to me like it's more rampant than we want to acknowledge as a society. These types of issues like pedophilia and terrible drug abuse and whatever else, whatever freaky things people are into. It's one thing if you want to like. I, I have nothing against drug use, right? I advocate for the completely decriminalization of everything. That's not a very Republican position, right? And I think that that's just a better position for society, as we should be treating like drug addiction as a mental health crisis and not a criminal justice crisis, right?
right. Mm,
But that's a policy discussion that could be had amongst people who are into that type of discussion, right? It's one thing to be like, yeah, all right, you should be able to use substances in the privacy of your own home as long as you're not abusing other people or harming other people. It's another thing to be like, yeah, I want to lower the age of consent to 14. There are people who advocate for crazy, wacky things, and there's just some people who don't care. They're pedophiles, right? And why are they in charge of our country? Why are they in the why? Like I'm stuttering just thinking about it.
yeah,
Hollywood, Hollywood, and government, and wherever else, they seem to be rampant. And I know from like my dealings in the political circles, I know a lot of very intellectually smart people who would be able to make policy decisions in a virtuous manner where they're really taking into account the needs of the people that they're elected to represent. And they'll never get elected for some reason, right? They'll never, ever, ever will get the media attention or the money necessary to run. It's always these scumbags that have the ability for others to blackmail them that end up in these positions of power. And that's another like I think it's done by design. Really do.
yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, kind of like a satanic type of theme, but I mean, like when you have people, that go to the events that you've seen, like calling
Like
you,
Rod Weber.
well, they call they're when they call themselves anti-fascist and they're doing all these things to shut you down.
Yeah.
It's like that connection. It's almost you would have to be kind of under like a serious to not be aware of what you're doing. Would be you'd have to be under a certain like degree of like serious mental kind of spell. I would say, but I just wanted to come back to like what you were talking about, like this global um, kind of thing that we're dealing with because the world is getting smaller, the population's kind of skyrocketed over the 20th century. It's kind of alone. It's kind of gotten a lot bigger, and so we've had to technologically deal with certain demands uh, just from the sheer size of the population has put a strain on you know environmental degradation and whatnot. But I had, like you mentioned, you see all these people, and you mentioned like the utilitarian type of ethic that kind of gets people to go along with these like rationale that will essentially to get them to do crazy things just
Mhm.
because they think they can convince themselves of they're doing something good. So it's
Yep.
like a mental gymnastics that they'll go through. But there is, in my opinion, like a certain level of warranted concern that I do think gets covered up, as regard to, like, the stuff that industry, unregulated industry kind of does pose a threat in some regard. But I'm not, like, not to say that we should have like full blown. It's just hard. It's a hard. It's so I do think that there is, like you were saying, Trump's doing this thing to kind of like combat the global establishment, and I do think that a lot of this Agenda 21 biodiversity, smart city stuff, um, is kind of something that is kind of being used as like kind of like anti-fascist type of fascist type
Yeah.
of thing. But I do think that there is something that we should be behind that, that is something we should be aware of. And as we've seen with previous wars in the world, if we did go to another war, it would probably be pretty devastating in that regard. So to avoid a conflict in that regard, like working together in a community type of setting would be nice. But but how we're doing it right now is what seems to be not productive, in the sense that it's more or less people that think that they're smarter dictating all these things. Like, you don't have a right, essentially, like our Constitution says, the Bill of Rights. Okay, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's something pretty fundamental. And there's a few fundamental rights that aren't too demanding. It's not like we need, like, you have the right to have like a massive corporation that's like consuming everything and like puts everybody out of business, and like everybody has to like do this in order to whatever, or like that you have the right to have all this land or whatever it might be. But there is some kind of balance that needs to be struck in some way, I think. But you're right; it does seem to lend itself to the fascist type of. There's always somebody that's going to come in, like you said. But I was just more or less kind of ranting there. But I
You're
did
fine.
want to get you. Um,
It's like doublespeak. They tell you one thing to your face, and the reality is something completely different. They call themselves the anti-fascists, but the reality is they're the fascists, because if you don't believe, it's intellectual fascism, is what I like to say. If you don't believe what they believe, then you don't have a right to speak or exist, right? They're anti-fascist to the extent that you can believe whatever it is that they're going along with. Um, the I think the struggle, and you were talking about this. In the United States, we believe in individual rights. So each individual person is worthy of certain things. You have the right to speak what's on your mind. You have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to not be searched by authorities without some sort of due process, right? Um, we guarantee, like, the function of our government here is to ensure that you have those individual rights, right? So we justify a certain amount of force and taxation to create a system that says you should be safe and secure in your body as you go about your day in society, right? And those things can extend into environmentalism, right? No, I think that this is where the left likes to really disconnect from having a conversation with the right. Is like, I don't know any conservatives out there who want to see factories dumping raw sewage or other chemicals into clean water systems, right? I don't know any conservatives that want to have just massive smokestack billowing factories, right? That just spew endless emissions into the sky. It's just the meat of the debate is well, how do we go about striking a balance between um, being able to take care of people's needs and the environment at the same time? Because all the people on the left, they rant and rave about the environment and about how we need to preserve it, and institute all these regulations, and yet they're just as bad at consumers as everyone else is. Technology, iPhones, laptops, cars. They're it's very hypocritical in nature. And the reality is when we make these environmental controls, just as an example, we put real restrictive environmental controls on American factories. Manufacturers just end up outsourcing it to other countries with less costly labor and less environmental controls, right? So we're just kind of outsourcing our pollution to somewhere else. It really has no effect. I think the struggle really is about individualism and collectivism. You know, the Agenda 21 mindset, the UN mindset, the communist mindset is about the collective good, and so that's when you can start getting into like, well, uh, in order to preserve the collective, we need to go into like there's a very real example of this in not too long ago history, like the Soviet Union. They went into Ukraine and they took all their grain, and they didn't leave the farmers, the people of Ukraine, enough food to last through the winter, and it resulted in a terrible famine. It's called the Holodomor, I believe it is,
Holodomor, yeah.
Holodomor. um, Millions of people, I believe, died as a result of the government's central planning, where they said, oh, it's okay, we can go take these people's food to preserve the rest of the Soviet Union. And it's the collective mindset that justifies these things. Whereas if you have a government that's centered around the individualist mindset, you don't have the same results. Yes, you do still have some people who suffer, and in a utilitarian, like even capitalism is kind of utilitarian in a way. We justify some of the ills of capitalism by saying, well, look, the system we have is able to sustain all these millions of people comfortably, and their level of comfort statistically seems to grow as time goes on. Yes, there are still people who are poor, but even the poor statistically over time move out of the poor and into the middle class at a higher rate than we can see in any of these other centrally managed systems, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
But the people on the left don't get it. Like they buy into the social justice mindset because it feels good, it sounds good, right? Who doesn't want to be like, yeah, if we just took a little bit from those evil rich people, it would make all these ills go away, right? It sounds like you could make that happen, but we've never seen it happen. We've only seen this wealth under capitalist regimes.
Yeah. I do think, like you were mentioned, like this kind of like social control type of the backs, you know, there's a blowback that happens, like we saw in Ukraine that you mentioned. But I do think this whole COVID stuff is essentially that, and I think um, a lot of the stuff that they're doing to kind of promote that, and the various things they're doing for, you know, digital currencies, and they're trying to essentially completely revamp the entire financial system to the point where, like, I saw, um, I've already seen articles where now you can't fly, you can't do this if you don't get a vaccine, or, you know, pretty soon it's going to be like, oh, if you're not, essentially, if you don't have the right political views, or if you don't do that, you know, if you don't believe the way we believe, it's essentially, it's like a full blown, like you were saying. And I think that whole the full blown like control type of
Hmm.
mechanism, and I do think that control will have essentially, like you were saying, like that you mentioned, like a pretty, and I think we're already starting to see it, and we've already seen it. Like we at the meeting with all these people who are kind of upset that their businesses and their livelihoods and their families are pretty much, they're they're going to be destroyed to a certain degree. And I do think that there's a lot of, if we do continue down the where the kind of social controls, it's gonna, like, this, the control kind of poses a threat in itself.
Yep.
Is what I'm trying to say.
I do like what I see happening right now with the masks and the shutting down of businesses and the rioting and the looting and now what seems to be election fraud, right? People are finding out where their line is in the sand, right? And I think some of the stuff is crossing the line. And I don't think that people are going to stand for it. Like, so you mentioned vaccinations, right? Like, practically speaking, you're right. Like, they may not have mandatory forced vaccinations, but they may have policies everywhere where you just can't do anything unless you go along with it.
Right.
And that's one of my lines in the sand. I got to say, like, there are certain things that I'm like, I'm not going to comply with this, and I will rage against the machine if you tell me I need to comply with this. Forced vaccination is one of them. I think, election fraud, serious election fraud, that's another line in the sand. And we need to have these conversations. Like, I think we need to have these conversations with our local law enforcement, right? Hey, police chief, where are you if the Biden administration gets in and says you need to go and confiscate my weapons? Like, where are you at with that, Mr. Police Chief? Are you gonna, like, do you really think that that's a place we want to be at? I think certain places, like, I've talked to police, they say no. Like, they're not going to do certain things. There are lines in this. Everybody has a line they're not willing to cross. Even our law enforcement, even our military, even our federal law enforcement, even at those levels. Um, we need to have these tough conversations with one another, and start planting these seeds that, like, at some point you need to ask yourself, is that paycheck that you're taking worth whatever your soul, like, are you going to be able to sleep at night? Is it worth it? And I hope that people have a long and hard discussion with themselves about where they're going to be when they're asked to do some of these things,
Yeah,
because we we can't let these agendas win. We can't just be like, I'm comfortable, I'm fat, I'm getting a paycheck, so
yeah,
who cares, right? We can't be that. Like, people come to the United States to escape their authoritarian regimes. If the United States falls to an authoritarian regime, the world has no place to go. Nobody, like, there will be no safe place for us to be. This is the last stand here.
yeah. I agree with you there, and I think like the meeting that you organized the other night, Super Happy Fund America, with all getting together all these groups in the area to kind of just provide make a foster a community that can act as a support network in the sense that not necessarily to like to start like you know being like the Minutemen or anything, but more or less, I think, because I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we can still do a lot of stuff that I think it requires a lot of like we mentioned, the organization is like a necessary a community to be able to do things. But like we have so many challenges that you've already enumerated. If we're to overcome these things as regard to infiltration and
Yep.
the all the stuff you've dealt with people sabotaging you and the vaccine, like we're seeing now the vaccine stuff. But I mean,
I think
I don't
I
know.
think it's I think it's important for us to leave all options on the table. And I'm not talking about violent revolution, right? Because I'm not
Yeah,
looking to overthrow the government. Like, a revolution is an overthrow of the government, right?
right.
I want the legitimacy of government, right? I don't want to be in power. I just want a virtuous government that represents the people. And if we're going to have outsiders come in, if we're going to have Marxists or globalists or whatever we want to label them, if they're going to come in and try to forcefully take over our representative government, then I think we're justified to resist it. And so I don't think it's a bad thing to be like, yeah, we should be not only proficient about how to fight back against this politically, but I think if we have literal people coming into our communities looking to use force, violent force against us, we need to be tactically proficient to be able to repel them. And I think that that's done at a community level, and that's not an anti-law enforcement thing. I want the law enforcement to be on my side if we have to fight against outsiders in our community. I want them to resist outsiders to our community, right?
Right.
And so while I'm not saying, yeah, we should be Minutemen and start thinking about offensive operations, I think that we should be, like, thinking about defensive operations. Like, how can I be more proficient with first aid? How can I be more proficient? Because I like shooting guns, right? I'm former Army combat arms, right? How can I be more tactically proficient with my personal firearms? How can I be proficient to be able to lead members of my community should it come to that, right? I don't think it's bad to be thinking along those lines. It's just it's when you start thinking about offensive operations, I think that we're taking it too far.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you that it's definitely something, those types of measures like the tactically efficient. I think I heard people mention that I think it was the three percenters are doing a great job of training people disaster preparedness. I
Yep.
think that's something that's probably going to be very useful in the near future, in my opinion. But hopefully, I mean, hopefully not. But I do think that yeah, like you were saying, there's so many things that we can do, like before, like if and like you were saying about the selling your, is it worth your soul to kind of like go along with this comfort that kind of that somebody may be enjoying with their present predicament, but later on it's really just going to be like eating away at you bit by bit.
Yeah, you
And
were complicit in the takeover of our country, right? Is it worth
right,
it?
yeah, I do think that that's something that people should be considering as the orders come down for whatever. But the I think like I'm reading a book right now called The Joy of Living, and like it's by a Buddhist monk,
Oh,
and
cool.
one of the things he uses like an analogy of the Western kind of his this Eastern Buddhist monk coming to the West to see all these things, engineering marvels and all these things. And there is a lot of like you were saying, like treating the drug uh, epidemic as kind of like a mental health crisis as opposed to a law enforcement matter. I think because there is like he in his book he describes the like looking at all these engineering marvels and these great things that people were able to accomplish, but they're like all the people, there's a lot of misery as well, and I
Yeah,
think I think when like a lot of this stuff can be overcome, like that that we face as human beings on planet Earth, like if we're able to breach the the things, but we've already established, if we're able to breach those gaps, like if we're able to kind of find find the happiness, like in something that's not necessarily that ease, but like there is a happiness when you feel like you're doing something right, like when you're. But I think there is a reward, which I'm sure you've seen, like doing your own uh, organizing, like that you. I'm sure it's like, I mean, obviously this. I'm not saying it's like a selfish thing you're doing, but like there is like you have to admit that like when you kind of live up to like something that calls to you and you're inside of like, oh, you need to do this. This is wrong, or that you're something that you shouldn't do. It's something that kind of feeds your life force.
I tell you, I sleep every night, no problem. Like I'm not laying awake wondering if I'm living morally on the right side of things, right? And I don't know if everybody can say that. And I'm not trying to like brag or anything, but I know at the end of the day, when I get through doing what I'm doing, I'm not bothered by anything at night. Like I'm not worried about the students who are attacking me. I'm not worried about the occasional threats that I get, because I know that even if I were to not wake up or if somebody came and like got me right now, I still like lived to the best of my ability to have a virtuous life. And I think that's important, um, for many many reasons. You don't even have to get into religious reasons. It's
Hmm.
not that this is necessarily a God or a religious thing. It's just, can I is my mind at ease when I go to sleep at night, and I want to be able to live moving forward with that as a yes. And sometimes that can be really heavy, especially when we start talking about potential like combat operations, for example. When you're asking people to put their like our events, sometimes people get assaulted, people get harmed, they go home hurting, right? People could really be seriously injured, and we're asking people to go and do that with us. that's some heavy stuff sometimes. It really is. But I'm still okay with doing it, and I know the people who do it with us understand. It's not like we try to conceal the fact that these are dangerous events that we're going to. We talk about security, and I know that these people, they have fully informed consent, but it still bothers me sometimes. And I think as time goes on, if people do continue to keep on getting hurt, it's gonna be harder for me to fall asleep at night. But it's gonna make us better about just, I think informed consent is important when we're talking about putting people's lives on the line. We don't want to kid around about the brevity of the situation. Um, I I don't know. I'm with him. As like happiness comes in different ways, right? Happiness can be something you find in a sunshiny day in the middle of the field smelling flowers and frolicking with the butterflies, or it
Right.
can be from putting yourself in extremely dangerous situations because somebody's got to do it, right? And then anything in between. We need to seek that happiness. Like one of the other things I don't want to be is just this automaton robot who just goes to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I come home, I play the PlayStation for a couple hours every night. I go to sleep. 2 weeks of vacation a year. Like I don't want that. I don't think that's going to fulfill me in any sort of fashion. We all need to find out what gives us that happiness. But at the same time, if you're happy at the expense of just completely ignoring all the suffering and all the injustice that's going on in the world, I think that that's immoral too. You know, but who am
Mm.
I to judge?
Yeah, yeah. I do think there's definitely something that we're are responsible for in our both our inner world and our outer world. I think that there is a kind of something that calls us. Um, I mean, but yeah, I think we're headed in the right direction as far as getting things going, and like people are waking up and people are starting to notice and kind of getting out of their. I think because in a way that the way our system has evolved and how it's been kind of perverted in a sense is that it does kind of put people either either because they're trying to like grind away and make that money and pay the bills or do whatever, for whatever reason. But I think there is something that does kind of like put us in our own little world, our own little bubble, and it can be hard to kind of find that resolve to kind of break out of that kind of prison in a sense that that might get somebody prevent somebody from taking action or getting involved as to something that they see doesn't sit well with them.
Mhm.
But I think that that's probably maybe one something we can appreciate for out of all this craziness that's happening. Maybe it just might jog a lot of people out of that kind of slumber.
Mhm. Well, I mean, if that's what it takes, then I mean,
Yeah.
I wish we lived in a society where we didn't have to worry about what our government's up to because they're doing the right thing, right? I wish that we lived in a society where I didn't feel insecure to go and just do my like seek my own personal happiness, because in a way I kind of miss being able to do that. There was a point in my life where I either was oblivious to what was going on or whatever was going on just wasn't really going on to the extent that it is now because I was unaware of it, right? And I had a different kind of happiness. I was able to, pursue things that I don't pursue now. Now, a lot of my time is taken up with the stuff that's going on outside, so to speak, and I feel like I'm missing out on a good amount of my life in the process. But it's okay. We have to do what we're here to do, and I think that everybody has a purpose, and I think I'm living whatever my purpose is.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing a good job of living it. I think I know I can say I'm appreciative for you helping give people a voice organizing people, making the connections, because I think it's, like you said, it's a kind of a decompression valve almost
Right.
to kind of make an outlet for people and also just help
Independent.
help.
I gotta kiss your butt a little bit too. Like independent media is the only way that anybody can get their unabridged, unagenda story out. Right. I don't think that. I think that no matter what I was going to say to you tonight, you'd be willing to report it, like in its honesty, and that's what we need from reporting. Is we need people who are willing to uh, just portray the story as it is without some sort of spin or twisting or agenda involved. And so I appreciate what you're doing. I just wanted to tell you
Well, I appreciate the nice little appreciation circle we got going.
that.
The circle can grow. Anybody listening can come on in, and we can have a mutual appreciation together. But
I'm
uh,
happy to talk to you anytime, and I'm sure that both John and Mark are as well.
awesome. Well, Samson, I appreciate you talking to me, and I'm glad we had this time to get together. I think hopefully we can get some more people to uh, get involved, start taking more note of what's going on in the world, and hopefully we can change the negativity, or change from where we're headed, where it seems to be headed. But in the future, I'm glad to know we got people like you out there.
And I feel the same for you, my friend. We'll keep you updated as far as our upcoming events and meetings are concerned. I am thinking about scheduling a Zoom call to try to get some of those new volunteers from our meeting the other night more engaged. And
Awesome.
you're more than welcome to be in on any of these things as well.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, yeah. Keep me informed. And is there any plugs you wanted to do to help people kind of get in touch with you or with Super Happy Fun America or any
Oh, sure. Yeah. So
organization?
we have a Facebook page, Super Happy Fun America. We also have superhappyfunamerica.com. We will be in DC this weekend for I think they're calling it the 10 million MAGA March. Um, I think that a number of us are also going to the inauguration, no matter who ultimately gets inaugurated. I think we're going to be going down there to DC again as well. We don't have any actual events scheduled coming up, but we are always looking for more people to get involved and to help us do, like, we need help doing nearly every single thing that our organization does. Legal, we need media, we need fundraising, we need organizers for like events. We need ideas. Anybody who wants to get involved, we will find a way to get you involved in this movement. And we need all the help we can get.